So if we look at the economy and the stock market right now, there's a lot of economic indicators, almost every single one pointing towards the fact that we are in a recession or at the beginning of a depression. Now, on the flip side of that, there's a lot of companies that are doing very well in this climate. They are prospering. But a lot of those companies have very high price to earnings ratios, meaning that there's a lot of speculation that things are going to get better. And that's why we have a stock market which appears as though nothing has happened and is reaching record highs. If you're talking about the NASDAQ, the S&P 500, Dow Jones hasn't quite caught up yet, but it's sure to get there if this bubble continues to inflate. Now, almost every economic indicator, like I said, is pointing towards the fact that we should be in a recession. But these are strange times that we are living in, okay, to say the very least. One of the biggest indicators that some economic shit hit the fan is on the horizon is the price of gold and silver. The price of gold hit a record $2,000. Okay, I don't hold a lot of gold. I have my one combi bar, which I showed off last year, which is probably not doubled in price, but it's gone up considerably in price since I made that video. And all I can say is that that's one of the biggest indicators that something is happening in the markets right now. Now, what is happening in the markets? Because it's easy to see that and say, well, everybody's just retreating to gold as a safe haven if the dollar collapses or if the dollar just becomes so devalued and watered down and diluted. Now, what I've long since theorized is that a lot of the inflation, which is a result of the QE, quantitative easing of the Federal Reserve, in addition to all the other credit and debt that's in the market right now as a result of fractional reserve banking, all of that debt, okay, is tied up right now either in the stock market or these assets. But once that becomes liquidated, once there's a big sell-off triggered, and I'm not talking about a big correction. There most definitely will be big correction days. There's going to be some scary days ahead for the stock market, I can tell you that. Probably going to see many more days of 1,000, if not 2,000 point dips, not only in the Dow, but possibly even in the NASDAQ coming up in the next few months here. So be ready for that. Everybody is expecting some major crash. Nobody knows what's going to actually trigger it at this point in time. And what's probably going to trigger it is one of these algorithms or a second wave. If we get a second wave of this virus, then you can bet your bottom dollar that the market is going to crash hard, because the Federal Reserve can only do so much more right now without really jeopardizing the U.S. credibility as a reserve currency around the world, because everybody's holding these U.S. dollars. And if they keep diluting it, if they keep debasing the currency by issuing more credit to these companies that probably ought not to even exist anymore, and many of them are going to declare bankruptcy, they're not going to be able to pay these debts back, and just to give out money to the masses, which, don't get me wrong, people need that money in order to survive. Otherwise, there's going to be more eviction strikes, and that's going to be something that's going to be coming down the road, because people are going to be forced back into the workforce now if they can even find a job because of, the government suspending a lot of benefits. There may be another stimulus check. They're probably going to try to send out one more before the shit hits the fan here in the fall. Because if there's another second wave, I don't see any way out of it. I do not think they're going to be able to pull the same thing that they did. Now, according to Jerome Powell, apparently they have an infinite ability to do this. They have an infinite ability to lend money, not spend. That's what they call it, lend. But we all know that a lot of that money is not going to get paid back because it simply cannot be paid back. This deficit that all these countries are running right now to shut down their economies and to give their populations money is going to have to be paid back in the form of taxation at some point down the road. That is going to continue this economic contraction. Now, the U.S. economy contracted 37% or something like that in this last quarter. So that was a huge contraction. Not to say that that trend is necessarily going to continue with the same intensity. It's likely going to improve in the third and fourth quarter as obviously the country has opened up. But that still is going to have lasting repercussions that have not been realized in the stock market. They've been realized on the street, where there's a lot of people who are unemployed. The crime rates are growing up in a lot of cities because more poverty leads to more crime, more black market activity, more addiction problems is one thing. Even in the city that I live in, there's been a noticeable increase in people with addiction problems. So the more addiction problems you have, that really is the root of so much crime in itself, because all those people got to go and steal stuff to get money for drugs. So if you have that happening, then you're definitely going to start to see a gradual deterioration of society. Now, if the US dollar starts to lose its potency as the global reserve currency, then that's when this whole rift between China and the United States... Baxter is really excited out there. You guys haven't seen Baxter in a while. He's turning into a beast. Anyways, now this is when it's going to get really interesting. If there is a second wave of this virus, and if the vaccine cannot be mass produced fast enough, and if the schools need to be shut down again because the second wave is more intense, heaven forbid there's a more virulent and deadly strain that emerges in the fall. Obviously, we know that if it arrives concurrent with flu season, there's going to be a much higher fatality rate. Now, you're going to throw in the politics of the vaccine itself. That is going to create a lot of divisiveness as well. We all know that that's going to create a divisiveness because there's a lot of people who aren't going to take it. There's a lot of people who are going to want to make it mandatory. That in itself is going to create an explosion of activity between the left and the right, not only the left and the right, just people who are advocating for it and people who aren't. If the US currency loses its legitimacy as the global reserve currency in light of the Fed having to resort to more quantitative easing and lenders just in general, all the banks having to lend more money, if they have to resort to that, that is going to widen the rift between the United States and other countries who hold that currency, like China. And we already know that the Chinese-US relations are at one of their lowest points in all of history. This is evidenced in almost every business transaction which is happening right now. We see this happening now. We see it trickling into the markets. You know, we know that Tesla has a gigafactory in China. So we know that there's still a lot of relationships in the market that go beyond governments, which are still kind of tying the two countries together and preventing a descent into total Cold War chaos. But you can imagine a scenario where those business relationships are still maintained, but the two countries are still going at it in some way, shape, or form, by proxy conflict or otherwise. That still is a scenario that can happen. You can still have two countries who have people within those countries doing business with each other, and I believe this was the case in Germany in WW2, where, you know, they were still doing business, but they were still at war with each other. Okay, so that could still happen. So just because Tesla is building gigafactories in China doesn't immunize us from a Cold War conflict with them. So that's one thing that can happen. Now, what's going to happen if there is a second wave? The price of oil is going to plummet once again. And the countries that are already impacted by that and all the industry built around that, not only in the United States, but also in Canada, where we have a very huge oil industry here, okay, these are going to be shut down, and that's going to have catastrophic economic implications. But it's going to be good for the renewable market. And that's why you have companies like Hyliion, Nikola, Tesla, all these, NIO is another one. All of these EV car companies who are starting to move in, and what's the other one? Workhorse is another one. They can see the writing on the wall that the future is in renewables and EV, because the oil industry is likely going to collapse if we go into another second wave lockdown situation. Even if we don't go into a lockdown situation, just the fact that the industry slowdown due to people not wanting to go out as much. I mean, just imagine for a second if there was a more lethal strain that emerged. Now, typically, viruses become less lethal over time, but we're only in the second wave, okay? That's an annual evolution that typically happens with viruses, is that over time, year after year, and because we have better treatments, they become less and less lethal. But we're talking about, we're still in the same year. This virus hasn't even had its second go through the population yet. It gets the low-hanging fruit first. It gets the weak. It's like in nature when the lions are hunting the buffalo. They pick out the weakest ones first, and then they gradually have to get stronger in order to take out the more stronger ones. The same thing that happened in the Spanish flu. The first part of the Spanish flu affected the old people and the infirm. The second part impacted the young, the middle age. People my age were infected in the second wave. So if that happens and we go into lockdown, or even if not, we have all of these situations which are going to start to spiral out of control. Now, I made that video 2 months ago where I said that we are entering the eye of the storm. I believe that we're still in the eye of the storm right now. Don't get me wrong, the price of gold is still rising. But somebody, somewhere, in high places, knows what's coming if the price of gold is getting that high. And these things happen in slow motion. It doesn't necessarily have to be an abrupt collapse. We may not see an abrupt crash. Okay, there's a possibility. There is a possibility, albeit a slim one, in my opinion, that the Fed is able to bring the plane down and stabilize it with some minor turbulence. There is a possibility that the market trades sideways for 2 or 3 years and doesn't really do anything until the economy kind of catches up with it, and then it's going to, launch again. Because the economy, historically, always goes up over time. That's why you should never, if you have investments in good companies, which have good fundamentals, don't sell in a panic sell-off at a major loss. Because if you can afford to wait 2 to 5 years, it's going to come back. And it may even double after that. So once again, I'm not an economic advisor, but I think that's, common sense in terms of market practice and trading. So, don't panic if the shit hits the fan. But I think right now we got about a month and a half. Before the effects of all of this stuff start to really materialize and become apparent. A lot of this is going to be determined by what happens when the kids start going back to school. We're going to start to really see things kicking off in October and November. And of course, you throw the election in the mix. You throw the George Floyd situation, the court proceedings in the mix. August is going to be the last month of relative political calm, not only in the United States, but in the rest of the world. Because remember, whatever happens in the United States creates a tsunami which drenches the rest of the world within a day. Okay, something big happens in the States, it affects everybody else. Because right now, the United States is the de facto world superpower. Okay, but that is shifting. That is shifting in a rapid way. We are on the brink of a transformation into a dual superpower world. And that is obvious if you've seen any Chinese military parades lately. Now, don't want to get into another big argument about that, because a lot of people seem to think that the Chinese military capability is drastically less than the United States. However, if you look at, and I'm trying to make this argument in a video that I did last year around this time, the United States military is kind of built around dealing with smaller countries, because all the wars that they fought right now, yes, they definitely have more military experience, but it's not the kind of military experience which would play a huge role in a mutually assured destruction WW3 scenario. I mean, for that, you could argue that the Chinese are better prepared than we are, because apparently they have cities under the ground, the Great Tunnels of China, I believe it's called. And so they have huge networks underground that they could still remain operational. Not only that, they're a uniform society. I think that's been demonstrated in their handling of this whole pandemic, that they've been able to put things on lockdown real fast. So you have to look at these things apolitically. I know there's going to be some Yahoo in the comment section being like, well, what do you mean about communism and all? Look, I'm not talking about what's better or worse. You know, I think I made it abundantly clear that I'm very pro-free market on this channel. I'm absolutely pro-free market. I think that it's the best system we got. Democracy is a terrible system, but it's the best thing we got type thing. Okay? So don't bring all that politicizing into the comment section. You got to try to look at this objectively. There are some countries' militaries which are prepared strictly for defense. And if you're talking about a WW3 scenario, it's really all about defense. It's about who can survive it, you know, the longest. Now, I don't think it's going to get that far. I'm going to be honest. I do not think that we're going to see WW3. I don't think the nukes are going to be used. If anything, it's going to be clandestine operations. It's going to be biological warfare. It's going to be cyber attacks and other things of that nature. Okay, that's what it's going to be. I don't think they're going to push the button in a big way, or it's going to be some new weaponry. You know, God knows what. Really, the future is data. Data is everything. That's why there's such a huge controversy over Huawei and TikTok, because data is everything. Most people don't understand, and perhaps it's not talked about enough on this channel as well, how powerful it is to have information about everybody in a certain country. So this is why China doesn't want Facebook. I mean, this is why China doesn't even want Google. This is why they want the Great Chinese Firewall. Because they understand that if that information is in the hands of Google or Facebook, which are American companies, then that's going to put them at a great disadvantage when it does come time to put the gloves on. So data is everything, guys. Big data is probably one of the biggest threats, not only to, you know, other countries, but to you, the individual. I made that video, 33 devices that are spying on you. Go check out that video again, because every single thing that you see around you, every single thing that you do, they're trying to put it into numbers. They're trying to quantify it into zeros and ones. When you go to the washroom, what kind of car you drive, where you go to, how many times a minute your heart beats, what your preferences are, every single thing about your personality, your psychology, your physiology. It's all data, guys. Because the more data they have, the more they can predict what is going to happen next. And the more they can predict what's going to happen next, the better they can advertise to you. And let's face it, the more easier people are to manipulate. Now, I'm not saying it's part of a grand conspiracy or anything like that, but I am saying that that is the end result of big data, aggregate or otherwise. Even with aggregate data, where it's impersonal, where they don't actually hold your personal information. All of that information that is learned through machine learning and AI, it learns things. It learns to just predict what you're going to do, even if it knows nothing about you. Just how, like, a Tesla car that's never been, driven, because it has access to the software and the AI, the global AI grid, it can self-drive. Well, that's a theory. Hopefully someday soon they'll be able to self-drive, because that'll be pretty cool. There's a lot of awesome stuff, awesome technology, which is going to come as a result of this. But this is such an amazing time to be alive right now, because we are in a transformation. If you wonder, I chopped up my thumb the other day. Don't worry, there's a video coming up about that, because if this would have happened in a SHTF situation, oh boy, I would have been in trouble. I would have had to use a lot of my special medications. Anyways, what was I talking about? I'm always going off on tangents. We are in one of the most pivotal times in human history. This is a transformative time. I know you could say that at almost every point in history. You could say that when the horse turned into the car, or the telegraph turned into the telephone. But right now it's different. There are so many disruptive technologies which are entering the market, whether it's cryptocurrency. Okay, like that in itself, that cryptocurrency is just waiting for the US dollar to collapse, to move in there and bring about the uber cashless society. Just waiting for an opportunity to do that. We're in the EV revolution. We're in the space revolution. We are on the brink of a major transformation of our species. But before that comes, there's going to be collapse. There's going to be dystopia, I believe, at least maybe not full-blown dystopia, but there's going to be a lot of abuse of privacy, put it that way. There's still going to be more conflict ahead, especially if people get pushed to the margins. In order to get to this, I don't want to call it utopia, because it's never going to be a utopia, because if it is, to me, utopia is synonymous with dystopia, because if everything is perfect, then in a way that's kind of hell. What's the point of living if there's no challenges? And typically that gets abused and becomes dystopia. Case in point, the best movie ever made, in my opinion, about the future, one of the most accurate, is Demolition Man. Go check it out if you haven't watched it yet. But it's really a dystopia veiled as a utopia, because everybody's rights are suppressed so they can live in this howdy-doody, happy-go-lucky Mickey Mouse fantasy. You have about a couple months, I would say, to get squared away before things come really interesting. Now, I'm not saying go out and buy gold, because I really don't know if gold is going to maintain at these levels. We just don't know what's going to happen in this market. Anything can happen right now. So I would say, to the best of your capability, diversify your portfolios. If you're just on the level of trying to get by, try to get more employment. Try to get jobs while you can. Try to save money while you can, even if it's a small amount. I got a big video coming up this weekend all about food, okay? Because food is everything. When it comes down to it, it's all about food. Make sure you are taking care of yourself. Quit your bad habits. As long as you are adaptable, flexible, as long as you are constantly researching what's going on in the markets and you're being frugal, then no matter what happens, you're probably going to be okay. But don't just wait for the market to tell you what's going to happen, because I can tell you that I've been paying very, very close attention to the markets. And on those days where it is crashing, the news media outlets are surprisingly silent until, of course, all the smoke clears, and then they all have their takes on it. But while it's actually happening, there's not a lot of news that you can find when the market's crashing. You know, either people are really starting to scramble to try to figure out what's going on, or they're just trying not to panic people. So you can't rely on consolidated media networks to tell you what's really going to happen next. You really always have to keep your finger over the panic button, over the SHTF go button. I'm sorry I don't really have any more tangible practical advice, but when it comes to financial advice, it's so ambiguous anyways. You can go and watch 100 financial advice videos, and at the end of the day, they're all going to be yeah, but videos. You know, do this, but it might be this way. So it is what it is. You really, at the end of the day, have to make calculated risks and hedge your bets in almost every way you possibly can. But do not alienate yourself from the market either, because this absurd upward trend in the markets could continue for a while. It could, even though it's rooted in no fundamentals whatsoever. And it doesn't matter what company it is, doesn't matter what prospects and how speculative and how great of a future a company has. Eventually, the fundamentals have to line up with the reality. And at some point, that's going to happen with this economy. We are in something similar to the tech boom, but not quite the same as the tech boom was. The tech bubble was in the year 2000. If you don't know what that was, it's where the NASDAQ ran up like 200, 300, 400%, and it crashed really hard after 2000, because that's when, people realized they were getting a little carried away with their speculations about how much money these companies were going to make. Now, they were right, but it was 20 years, not, 1 year, 2 years like people thought it was going to be. So in a lot of cases, you can make the argument that a lot of people are thinking that a lot of these gains that these companies are going to make in the next couple of years are probably really 5-10 years out. And that's when you're going to see sizable downsizing. So buy the dip, as they say. If you got money, if you got savings, maybe wait for a major correction before you start doing investing. But at the same time, a lot of the money in the stock market right now is because people are moving away from bonds. They're moving away from putting their money in their savings accounts because there's such a low interest rate that there's no sense in having a savings account because it doesn't generate any return. So everybody's putting their money into the markets right now. That's why the markets are going up. That's why the markets are so inflated. You have the Federal Reserve, which is propping up the markets as well, backstopping the markets with all the credit that they're lending out. And so all of this money is really inflating the stock market. So that's why, if there's a major correction, if there's a major trigger, that's all it's going to take is some, algorithmic trading thing gone haywire to trigger a massive panic sell-off. And that is going to happen. That will be triggered by some global news story. I know there was a situation today with Beirut. There was a bombing there. Is that related to the rising tensions that are going to happen in the Middle East due to lower oil revenues, which is going to factor its way into those populations because most of those countries rely on oil revenues in some shape or form to feed their populations. And if they don't have that, then there's going to be trouble. Okay, and that's when wars break out, and that's when proxy conflicts break out. Now, we still have oil for decades down the road. Don't get me wrong when I talk about the lithium revolution. We're still going to have oil for a long time. But there's companies, like I was saying, Helion, their whole thing is converting semis into EVs. They can convert a semi into an EV much cheaper than a Tesla semi is going to cost. So a lot of companies are going to opt for that, because they're going to get these credits from the government. They're going to get these kickbacks, carbon credits, whatever you want to call it. And there's other companies like Workhorse that are trying to take over the courier space to basically to electrify almost all of the delivery vehicles on the roads. This is happening. Talking about drone deliveries, all this other stuff. So all of these markets are going to be disrupted. Oil is just a bad bet right now, okay, unless there's some major issue with lithium mining. And to be honest, if you want to be really forward thinking, invest in lithium. However, that's not to say that there's not going to be some other invention that's going to make lithium obsolete. It could happen. Anyways, let me know what you guys are preparing for down below. What do you think is going to come? When do you think it's going to come? How are you preparing for it? Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you found this video informative. Canadian Prepper out.